I'm really excited to share this interview with you where I talked to my friend Brian Lee. And I wanted to talk to Brian for a couple reasons. So, we met during grad school when we were doing our PhDs, but Brian's background is actually in chemistry. So, his master's degree is in chemistry. And then we met at UW Madison, where we were both doing our PhDs in food science. And Brian is just one of those people, maybe you know someone like this, where even if you feel like kind of like meh, once you talk to them, you just realize you start to feel better. Like you leave more feeling more positive. So he is someone I've really enjoyed talking to. He has also written a book, 150 Food Science Questions Answered, and he is getting into consulting. So he is someone just someone who has all these different like fun projects going. He is always up to something new. So I hope you enjoy my talk with Brian Lee, and I'll be back at the end with 3 key takeaways. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Abby the Food Scientist. I'm Abby, and today I have a special guest. He is an author, a consultant, a food scientist by PhD. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Hi, it's good to talk to you. Good to catch up.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't seen you in so long, Abby. So I'm glad to get this chance to chat and talk about food science in general, a little bit of career.
No, I'm excited because you are doing a lot of interesting things, but our paths actually crossed back in grad school at UW Madison. And I was, doing my PhD in a basement lab, and you were on the first floor. But I feel like your lab, you were like the only one in it. So you had to go out and make friends with the other labs.
That's very true. I mean, I was always walking around during breaks and chatting with everyone. And it was nice to get out of the stinky lab because I was working on garlic and onion all the time. So, yeah, needed a little breather every so
Yes.
often.
I imagine. Yeah. I always like whenever I saw you in the hallway, you would be carrying like the tiniest little vials sealed. And I'd be like, what is that? And you're like, oh, it's like really stinky garlic extract or like something like that.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. There's a funny story where I broke one of those, and yeah, it stunk up the whole building, and I
Oh,
got in trouble for that.
oh my gosh. I mean, I feel like that's bound to happen with you're only working with glassware. Like, oh my. That's so different where like my lab in the basement we're like ice cream, candy, caramel, and then you're upstairs being like onions and garlic.
Yeah, that's why I spent a lot of time downstairs. I think I took a lot of your guys'
Yes,
candy.
yeah. No, we had like a huge candy table, and our lab group was like 10, 15 people. Like it was a bit of a rambunctious lab. So it's yes, yeah, it was always something happening. No, but where I want to start with, Brian, is I know you have your PhD in food science, but your background is it chemistry? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it's a bit of a interesting story. Yeah, basically, I graduated in 2011 with my bachelor's in chemistry, and I at that time I had gotten in a number of graduate programs in chemistry, but I really didn't know if that was the right path for me. So um, I took a year off and I walked the country for 2,000 miles for about 6 months. And that really showed me the importance of food because I spent a lot of that time eating tuna out of a can, peanut butter sandwiches, and just like really random foods along the way. And I was like, huh, I really like food. I kind of miss food, and I really enjoyed the idea of during that time, a lot of people would invite me over for dinner or have a meal with me, and we talk about my story, and their lives, and I just thought, wow, food's really interesting. And but we didn't have a food science program in my college, and I didn't know it was a field at the time, so I thought, well, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, and maybe I'll end up there somehow. So after my walk, I was slated to go to Stanford for a PhD in chemistry, and it was like a dual degree program in the medicine department. And I just wasn't feeling it, and I realized that you know, at some point, I actually was trying to meet up with Patrick Brown of Impossible Foods before. I think he was still getting venture capital at the time, but he was still a professor at Stanford. And someone had mentioned, like, oh, he's making vegan burgers. I thought that was so interesting. I was like, this guy who's been a professor at Stanford forever, and now he's going off and making vegan burgers. Like, there must be something here. But I never actually ended up, he wasn't in his office, and I never actually ran into him. So, but it got stuck in my head, and at some point I was in the chemistry library, and I saw a journal on flavor, and I just thought, wow, like there's a whole journal devoted to this stuff, and it was so fascinating to me. And I really took a bit of a leap there, and I decided to leave the program. uh, and I went back and I did a few random things. I didn't really know what to do at that point. I tried to make like vegan ice cream for some time, and then I was like, huh, maybe I should really do a coordinated search. And I eventually, I finished my master's in chemistry back in my university, and I found that there was food science, and I decided to apply. And I was like, oh, this could be cool. And I ended up at UW Madison, and it was great. I was like, everything about food was perfect for me, and I really was glad to kind of make that transition, because I didn't want to be making pharmaceuticals or
Yeah.
petroleum products all my life. I really wanted to do something that was related to people,
Mhm.
interacting with people, and something that would bring joy. And I thought food would be the best way to do that.
I love that. So, would you say the first time it dawned on you that like food science was a field was when you were in the library just like perusing the shelves or something?
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know there was a IFT. I didn't know there was a Journal of Food Science. I didn't like, there was no thought of like, oh, like some chemists will end up in food. Like nothing. There was not
Right.
that ever in my brain. I didn't know anything about all the Alton Brown or anything like that. I
Right.
never did that. But I loved chemistry, but I was like, I gotta do something with this. And
Right.
I really wanted to find something that really suited me. And yeah, that was like a light bulb moment where I just found that journal. There's all the chemical, you know, equations and the structures, but it was like, hey, this is how you make, green apple flavor. And I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Right. No, it's definitely, I mean, everyone says this, but food science is such an applicable science compared to maybe like chemistry or biology. Like, you work with things that people interact with, eat with every day, and that is a very fulfilling job. It's really
Right,
cool.
right, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
And I was wondering, so you transitioned, was your bachelor's degree also in chemistry?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was studying mostly materials chemistry and polymer chemistry, and I had this like whole love affair with organic chemistry for a
Okay.
while. And
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
No. So then when you went from chemistry into food science for your PhD, was that transition easy or difficult, or how was that for you?
I think it wasn't too bad. The Definitely the hardest part was the microbiology aspect. Like I was gonna do a dual major in biology and chemistry, but I was like I really hated
Uh-huh.
labs, and I really didn't understand, like, a lot of it felt kind of archaic to me.
Mhm.
Nowadays, like, I'm really grateful for that background, but definitely at the time I was a little snooty, and I was like, oh, chemistry is so fundamental, and you can you know your reagents and come in together, and they produce like a very clean product. And then I was like, why is there bacteria? Like, this doesn't make any sense. But then, after realizing the importance of food safety, I've actually, a lot of my work nowadays involves dealing with substances and microorganisms, and I actually love it because it's actually so fascinating. There's a lot you can't do, you know,
Mhm.
with basic organic chemistry techniques that microorganisms are really good at. And sometimes they're a little finicky, but you kind of think of it,
Yes.
oh my god, that. You gotta take care of them.
Yes, the first lab I worked in when I was an undergrad was a microbiology lab.
Oh, really?
Yes. I worked in it for 1 year. I think I
Yeah,
was either a sophomore or a junior. And for 6 months, all I was trying to do was make this microorganism grow and it wouldn't grow.
it
Like
just wouldn't grow.
it's just empty plates. Like every couple days I'd check and be like, please, please, please.
Oh
And
my
for
god,
6 months, nothing grew, which meant I
that's
couldn't do
horrible.
any experiments.
That's hard. That's not a good experience to have as an undergrad. You feel like a failure.
And that's like, I'm never messing with microbiology again. Like, I'm going to do research in something else.
Right, right, for sure, for sure.
Yes, yeah. So that made me realize like microbiology is very difficult. No, but that's funny. And I think during your PhD, which this blows my mind, you were actually writing a book.
Yeah, so at the tail end there, so I was running the Science Meets Food blog for
Oh
Institute of
yes,
Food
yes.
Technology, and through that somehow a publisher kind of reached out to me, and this is in the December right before the pandemic hit in
Mm,
2020, and you know I was like, do I write my dissertation right now or do I write a book? And
yeah.
you know, I consulted my wife, and she was like, you're not going to get another chance to write a book, so you might as well take it now. I mean, this is it. It was she was very supportive, and she said that I'll help you kind of get through this, and I really appreciated that. But I blazed through. I mean, I spent 2 months writing the draft.
Oh,
Uh, Literally just you know, every moment that I had, I wrote the book,
wow.
um, while doing experiments, and it was awful. I don't but I think I got lucky because when the pandemic hit, that opened up a lot of time for me to,
Right.
that time I'd already submitted my manuscript for the book, um, and then so I just started focusing more on my dissertation. But it was a little rough, and definitely there was some question marks as far as my dedication to the PhD. So I was like, I'm just gonna have to ride this wave, and luckily I got everything done. It was a little tight, but it happened.
That seems crazy to me, but your book is now out. It's 150 food science questions answered, and it's beautiful. So you sent me a copy early to look at, and it's just a beautiful book. Like I love you have it separated into sections. So it's like questions about pasta, questions about meat, about spices. Like it's super fun. I think any food scientist, for like any food scientist, this is like the best coffee table book to have out that people could like sit through.
That's high praise.
Yes, yeah, no, it's and it's a book you could sit down and read a lot of it, or you just read one page, you read like one fact. It's very it could be used for many things. But I'm curious how you had to do a lot of research for this. How did you go about that? Like 150 is a lot of questions to answer.
It's a lot of questions to answer. I definitely put on my PhD hat, and I read a lot of primary sources just to like get my fundamentals right. But then at some point I just realized, there's also a lot of information that's already out
Mhm.
there, and it was just fun. I just got to read a bunch of stuff like from all over the place, and kind of make sure that I had at least something to source my thoughts on. Um, I would say probably the part that took a little bit of time and was a little more challenging was debunking things and making sure that I was saying things correctly. And there's definitely there's conflicting sources, conflicting thoughts. And at some points I just deferred to the USDA, right? And then that isn't always the case. There's definitely a huge debate about eggs right now, as far as like do you wash them. In the US you always wash them, and you make sure that the exterior is clean of salmonella. And then when I went to Europe, I went to London and Paris, um, they don't wash their eggs. It's completely not washed, but that also is safe because it keeps the cuticle uh, packed. So and they leave them at room temperature. So it's like wow, that's completely different. And so that's those are kind of some of the things that I ran into with this book, but I knew that fundamentally, the audience would be United States, so I kind of deferred to that and said, this is what the USDA
Right.
says. So
No, no, I see that. In so I have never really published a book, but was there anything surprising about the process of actually getting a book out from writing it to like launching it and selling it?
yeah, I've never had an editor in my
Yeah.
life. So and then the publisher had an editor, and there's fundamentally a difference in terms of writing something that's knowledge based versus writing something for an audience, and you kind of have to really think about, is this interesting for a reader? Is this something that's really, and we ended up cutting a number of different questions and adding new ones, and they had come in with 75 questions already established. So
Okay.
that was kind of the baseline, and then I added 75 more. And I think you kind of feel that your writing's a little precious, and you feel really attached to it. And at some point with the book writing process, you got to learn to just
Yes.
let go, right? And definitely I deferred on letting go as much as I could because I really wanted to get it done, and I didn't want to feel like I was bogging up the process. But that's something that was really surprising for me to just have whole sections just disappear and go, I don't know what's going to happen to this, and it's probably never going to come out ever in any form.
No, I agree. I'm someone where it's like, okay, let it go. It's not the biggest thing that's going to happen in your life, but it is like
Right,
I spent the time and thought on this, like
right.
I totally get like this is precious to me. How could you just go cut it out?
Yeah,
No.
yeah, definitely. There's an artistic process there that I'm
Yes.
like, wow, oh, this is different. This is a little
Right.
different.
No, and at least when I started writing for like a general audience, so we both were writing for IFTSA's blog. You were the editor, you're the big boss man. I was just a writer. Um,
That was the most important part. I'm not sure, I was really just going, okay, the numbers are good.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was keeping the metrics going.
Yeah, so we worked together on this blog, and one of the hardest things, because that was the first blog I wrote for. It was really when I just started being interested in science communication, but it felt like writing for a general audience. I had to like ignore all the scientist in me. Like I had to ignore the scientific writing process because no one cares if you sound smart because
Right.
they want to just be it to be relatable. Like and like in blogs you should personalize it. Like the editors would always comment like, Abby, could you add a personal introduction, like a personal antidote? And I'd be like, I can't do that. I can't talk about myself.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like including something that's so personal, and it's an interesting perspective on writing because like you said, like as a scientist, you have to take away the
Yeah.
human. But I'm learning that actually, you know, nowadays it's becoming a little more acceptable. Maybe not in the hardcore
Right.
research publications, but definitely in some scientific communities. The idea is we spend so much time trying to remove ourselves from it. People aren't really interested in the work. So it's becoming a little bit in vogue to include more about the personal story and the journey and like how did you even even if it's a small segment about potatoes, it's like how did you get to this point about even
Yeah.
thinking about those, right?
Yes. Yes. No, and I enjoy that. Like it's very weird when I write like a journal article for like a research journal versus when I'm blogging or thinking about YouTube. Like I feel like I wear like two separate hats. Like it's like my scientific writing skills, which is like the salt was weighed out to 3.4 grams. Where like in reality, it's like I weighed that salt out 100 times to do this experiment in replicates. It was a pain in the butt. Like
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot more behind the story. I
Yes.
think you should check out. There's a sort of a new kind of open access journal movement called Decentralized Science, and
Yeah.
there's one called Seeds of Science. You should check it out. They do kind of more of a. They're looking more for like a more of a blog style scientific journal,
Oh,
and right, they are interested more in these sort of nuances of how you got to there, and not so much about necessarily like this is the objective
right.
situation, because they realize there is no true objective reality. Like there's what you see and what you observed and what you, that you're still a person. So I highly recommend it. It's a really cool approach, and I'm seeing if I want to submit something to them, but it would be, it's a cool different perspective
Yeah.
on yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that sounds super interesting because I think sometimes when you write a regular journal article, you take out all like the hardships. Like it took me 100 days to figure out this method. Like you take that all out and you just say what the final method was, so no one can
Right.
learn from all of your trials to get to that method.
Right, definitely. And I think there's actually a lot of richness in all the approaches that you take, because nowadays, like, what I wrote for my dissertation, it's very bare bones, but
Yeah.
I took a lot of that information and a lot of the trial and error and the things that I experienced, and I'm actually working with a small business in Canada um, that does um, that does agricultural work, and we're working on a patent together on it, because all that was actually really valuable, but it never made it into dissertation because it wasn't the subject of that work. But I've realized that there's actually other applications for what we were developing, and it's like, yeah, this is like totally different, and I think you lose a lot of that. You
Yeah.
lose a lot of knowledge in that experience when you're trying to just create this picture, right, of like, this is the perfect
Yes.
story that I've created, from all these, hundreds of days of working on this. But there's a lot more to it for sure.
Absolutely. And looking back at any research I've done, you learn a lot more from failed experiments than you might learn from the ones that finally work because there's a reason they keep failing.
Right, absolutely, 100%.
Brian, this is super interesting, but can you tell us what you're up to today? So, after finishing your PhD, what did you go on to do?
Yeah, so the book really helped. It was kind of my gateway to approaching a lot of startups in the food industry, and a lot of nonprofits and that sort of thing. And it just became a way to say, hey, like, I know how to communicate with people. I know how to write things down in a way that's interesting and engaging. And that I started off kind of writing blogs for a number of different companies, and most notably Turtle Tree, which I really am grateful and appreciative because they've gone on to do great things. But I started off with them when they first got their funding round, and that was a way for me to say, hey, I'm working with these guys. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. There's startups that reach out to me, individuals that reached out to me, entrepreneurs, and so I do a lot of different things with people now. I do formulation work. I advise on production. In 2 weeks, I'm going out to San Diego to work with a hookah company, to help them develop their flavors.
Yeah.
And it's kind of been quirky, the sort of things I've engaged in. And I think a lot of that's just been open, just me being open to opportunity. And there's been a lot of failures. Like in the beginning, I messaged like 50 or 100 companies, just like, this is what I do, and this is how I'd be valuable. And I lucked out with the one or two that said, yeah, let's do something together. Um, and like I said, that's just been from there snowballing. And I've been able to do interviews with Huffington Post and Entrepreneur and Insider and Forbes and that sort of thing. And it's been really great. I think I've been in the best situation possible. COVID actually was amazing for me. I mean, it's been terrible. It's terrible.
Yes. Yeah.
But as far as the very small niche of
Yeah.
remote food science consulting, it's helped me a lot because, you know, I think a lot of times food companies were like, "What do we do?" Because we can't get anyone into here. So I became that person that would they could just reach out to and say, "Can you deal with this problem?" And it's never been anything that's been outside the scope of my capability. And I think I've done a lot of learning along the way, but I realized that all I have to do is be one or two steps ahead of, you know, my clients, and they've been really appreciative of the value that I bring. Not everyone has. I think, you know, it depends on the situation and depends on, you know, what I know and what I can bring to the table. But for the most part, I think a lot of it has been that research and publications are locked behind a paywall, and there's also, you know, scientific jargon that most people don't know or don't understand or don't have the time to really get into. And a lot of people who are in business, they need a fast answer, they need a quick answer, and they really don't. I think a lot of people kind of reinvent the wheel because that information isn't available publicly. um, and I think there was a bill that got released. I think it's slated to go into effect in 2025 that says any federal funded research needs to be made available open access. And I think that's a huge step. That's a huge, huge step because that is the problem. And I, as much as I'd like to say, yeah, I'm providing a lot of value, I think part of the value is also me being able to access this information and provide it in a way that's easy to understand. Because there's plenty of smart people, plenty of people with PhDs, you know, who come to me from companies, and it's not that they don't know this information. It's not that they didn't know how to access it in their graduate program. It's just that they just don't currently have access to it, and that's sad. That's sad that you know, I'm sitting here and I'm going through the publications, and you know, the information is there. I can just easily, you know, pull it out and say, yeah, this is what you're looking for, and this is will solve your, you know, plant-based meat or, you know, vegan meat or cellular agricultural issue. So that's kind of the bird's eye view of what I do. But yeah, right now I'm working with the biggest project I'm working with is with the Good Food Institute. I'm helping them develop some ideas and plans for the, you know, alternate protein industry. How do we take a lot of the agriculture residues that we produce, whether that's like wheat bran or rice bran or, you know, cornmeal, a lot of these things that just end up as animal feed, and how do we transform that into alternative proteins or fermentation products or cellular agricultural products? And it's been a lot of fun. It's been very difficult. Um, there's not a lot of information out there. We're kind of like at the edge of things. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was this whole um, you know, scientific movement to determine if there's ways to proteins from like random stuff, and that ended up becoming the beginnings of corn, you know, QUORN.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, that there's a lot of research from back then where they did a lot of that work already because there was this fear that there wasn't going to be enough protein sources. So we're kind of reinventing the wheel in a sense. um and it's very interesting because, you know, that information is available, that literature is available, but it's not easily accessible.
No, I agree. I'm lucky because either I've been a student at a university or working at a university. So I've always had, for me, free access to these journals. But I
Mhm.
can't imagine if I left this job, that is all gone. And it's super expensive on your own. It's really sad.
Yeah, yeah, I spent a lot of time as a graduate student saving papers.
Yeah.
Just
You
I
save probably thousands of dollars.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, for
So,
sure.
so sad. But your job, I mean, I'm not surprised that you're doing such interesting work. I'm like, that's Brian. Like, that makes sense. Like, all these little interesting projects, like, that just sounds, it sounds, you know, every day you could be working on something a little different. It sounds cool.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really grateful. I think this is kind of the best I could envision for myself. I always joke to my clients that I'm the worst employee. You never want to hire me. Like I'm much better spent like, give me this task or, this project and I'll figure out a way to get there, but
Yes.
don't manage my time because I,
No,
I, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's hilarious. And can you talk about, so you were telling me you're setting up a bit of a lab in your own house. What are your plans for that?
Yeah, so I've been getting really involved in mushrooms, and I'm realizing the I'm so fascinated by the idea that mushrooms of all the organisms on Earth are some of the few that can transform decaying matter or
Mm,
decomposed matter, or like really things that have in the regular food industry, you know, terrible food safety
yeah.
associated with, but basically garbage, and transform it into something that's edible, right? And actually food safe. And that to me is, I don't want to speak too boldly, but I think that's fungi are definitely something that we're going to see a lot more in the future. So I've been using fungi to grow, just kind of on my own, just making my own, a lot of oyster mushrooms stir fry and I'm using it to make fertilizer. I'm trying to grow some stuff with the stuff that I make at home, and that's kind of part of my lab. The other part of my lab is I do a lot of flavor chemistry for my clients. It's kind of all over the place. There's a
Okay.
lot of very interesting products out there, very strange products. No, no, in a good way. I'm really grateful because I'm able to do a lot of fascinating things, and it's some things are really challenging to solve, and
Yeah,
I
I
have to be
believe
very
it.
creative.
And I was just wondering, this just came to my mind. Did you mean to sort of go the consulting route after your PhD, or did it just happen, after a while?
uh, well, I was doing a little bit of consulting in graduate
Yeah.
school, not too much. Like some of it was just there'd be mom and pop
Mm,
business that needed some food safety, some basic food safety knowledge, and I'd meet them in Madison, and we'd go get a coffee, and I'd chat with them for a little bit about that. But eventually it just snowballed because at during the pandemic, my wife was like, you gotta find a job, Brian. And yeah, she ended up finding a job before me in the Olympic Peninsula, and in Washington State, there's not a whole lot of jobs for food scientists out there. So I said to her, you know what? Let me make this work. Let me figure this out. And I did. I don't know how.
yeah.
I think one of the things I learned, and this is a kind of a trait that my mom instilled in me, because she's an entrepreneur, she's a businesswoman, she makes money out of nothing. I don't know
Yeah.
how she does, but I took a little bit from that, and I learned that there's ways to convey value, and I think that's not something that you learn in school.
Right.
It's definitely something that you kind of have to learn in School of Hard Knocks, which is you talk to someone, the way that you talk to someone, you have to convey this idea of there's an exchange of value. And I learned that scientific knowledge is extremely valuable if you package it a certain way. If you
Right.
package it the wrong way, and I was trying many different ways, there's some open access ideas, and like sort of I was trying to do it on social media, and it's not there's something about free that people don't necessarily value. I don't know what that is. um, but when you say, hey, there's this incredibly important knowledge that could help you improve your bottom line, improve the money that you make, people really like that. They really like hearing that. They really like knowing that someone is out there kind of dealing with these problems that they don't necessarily want to deal with. And I don't blame them. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want to deal with operations or
Right.
the other or marketing or sales, but it's incredible when you go and sit down with someone and say, "Oh, I know what problem you're dealing with. I can solve that," and then you do, and then they tell other people, and they're like, "This guy knows how to solve this
Mhm.
problem,"
Mhm.
and I just basically just did that
Right.
for the last year and a half, and it's been great. I I actually wanted to do this for a long time, and I thought, oh, I'll spend like 5 or 10 years at like PepsiCo or something
Right.
like that.
Mhm.
But like I said, the pandemic just accelerated everything, and I just ended up in this position where it's been really fun. It's kind of what I've always wanted to do, honestly. And I'm getting my fingers in everything. You know,
Yeah.
I'm working with companies to develop patents. I'm, you know, helping them formulate. Sometimes I'm that guy that has to kind of be the bulldog with, you know, certain agencies or with certain, you know, organizations or regulations, and I'm just like, yeah, this actually makes more sense, because a lot of the times people don't know, you
Right.
know, business owners don't know, and they sit there and they where they have to twiddle their thumbs because, you know, they're dealing with, you know, bureaucracy or minutia that, you know, I can go into a paper and say, I referenced this, I said this person did this work and this research, this is food safe, I wouldn't be concerned about it, and they go, good, and
Yeah.
they put the stamp of approval, and
Yes.
you know, and that feels very satisfying, because then I can help people bring their products to market, which is really hard in the food industry. I You know, and I've experienced that myself personally, and I think that's where I come in. I have that experience of having tried to start a vegan, you know, food business back in my
Yeah.
younger years and going through all those issues, and I'm really happy to be able to do the same for other businesses and companies. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they're maybe starting a food company, but they may not know that food scientists exist. And once
Right.
they figure that out, they're like, wait, someone knows this stuff? Like,
Right.
talk to one of them because I recently got an email from a entrepreneur, a guy, he was trying to start a pet food company or like,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
small scale like pet food brand. And I've never worked on pet food. I don't know a lot about pet food, but I know basic food safety and food science. I was like, yeah, I can talk to you for like an hour. I can tell you, you know, like the major things you need to look out for because it's just like the general food science knowledge. Like you don't always have to be specialized or you'll
Right.
figure it out along the way.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a really interesting I call it the information imbalance, essentially. Like, you know, I run I'm one of the moderators for the food science group on Reddit.
Oh,
And there's just like tons of people that get on there that, you know, are trying to start businesses, or, you know, are entrepreneurs, and they're like, "Oh, do I need a chef?" And I'm like sitting there like, "No, no, no. Like,
yeah.
you know, that's not who you need.
Yes.
That's the wrong, you know, expertise." And you're right. Like, people don't know food scientists. They don't know that that's a field. And like me, and I'm sure like you, and when you were starting your education, you're not exposed to that. That's not even a career path. And I'd love to see more people get into it, because I think there's a lot of scientists who, you know, get into biology, into
Mhm.
chemistry, physics, and they, you know, they don't know what to do with that. And I think there's a lot of value to be added to, you know, the food industry, and you can see that a lot of people who start companies are from other fields.
Yeah.
They actually don't tend to be food scientists, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
separate issue for
Right.
another time. Um, but you know, and I'm meeting a lot of people, you know, engineers
Mhm.
who love food,
Yeah.
you know, and scientists who love food, and they didn't know that this was, you
No.
know, a pathway. And you know, I think a lot of people would love to get into that. And to me, it's like, it doesn't matter what your background is. You have the basic knowledge. You can. Like, I just happen to be in food science, but if, you know, if I had gone down the chemistry route completely, I know plenty of people who, you know, made that switch, and I see a lot of people who love to make that switch.
Yeah.
Maybe they're 5 years down in a pharmaceutical
Yeah.
career and they're out, or, you know, maybe they're, you know, building, you know, airplanes, and they really wanted to get out of that. And it's like, you can, like, it's possible. There's definitely a need for scientific knowledge, basic fundamental scientific knowledge, and engineering knowledge. And I think, yeah, if food is gonna stay.
Yes. Yeah. No, I
It's
know.
definitely gonna stay.
Exactly. Yes. You have some job security in
Exactly.
food science. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right, Brian, I have one more question for you that I like to
Yeah.
ask everyone. And this is, do you have any piece of advice or something you wish you would have known when you were a food science student?
Hmm. I think I think get put your hands in a lot of different places because you're not sure where you're gonna go. It's perfectly acceptable to go out on your own and find the opportunities there because there's a lot. There's
Yes.
a lot. I don't think there's because this is such a niche field and there's not a lot of universities that produce food scientists. I think there's so and people don't think like, oh, like you need a lot of scientific knowledge to
Mhm,
do
mhm,
food, but you do, and especially nowadays, especially now that it's so complicated.
mhm.
So there's so many ways that things can go wrong, and I think if you're disciplined and you find your way, you'll definitely make it in this industry for sure, for
No,
sure.
no, that is wonderful. Brian Lee, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to catch up and always to hear about what sort of projects you have going on. It's always interesting.
Yeah, it's really fun to catch up with you, Abby, and I'm really happy to hear about you and what you've been up to. I'm really happy to see that you're still working on your YouTube and your social media because I think that's going to be huge too. I keep an eye out too. I'm watching your videos.
That makes me so happy to hear that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
All right, Brian, I will talk to you soon.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much. It was a
Bye.
pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my talk with Brian, and maybe you see now why I find him so interesting. But I just wanted to end with my 3 key takeaways that I learned from talking with Brian today. My first key takeaway is never underestimate the power of connecting with your peers. And this is something Brian reminded me about when he was talking about grad school and how he was the only person in his lab, so he would just walk around the building trying to find people, connect with people. And one thing I kind of took for granted during my master's and PhD is that you are really surrounded with some of the smartest minds. Like, these people are experts in their industry, and it's really important to connect with the professors, to connect with people who are also getting their degrees, because these people will then go out into industry or maybe stay in academia, but they will always be part of your food science network. And many of the people I met while doing my food science degrees, well, they are my friends now, but they're also the people, like, if I have a food science problem I can't solve, those are the people I go to because I know even if it's sort of outside their expertise, they are just very smart and very good at problem solving. My next key takeaway is that it's always okay to step back and reevaluate. And this is something that took me so many years to understand, and I'm still kind of bad at it today, where I tend to just like always push myself more and more, trying to push forward, when sometimes the best thing to do, like Brian said, if something isn't feeling right during when he was in the chemistry department, he took a year off, went on this extremely long walk across the United States, and reevaluated his life. And this is actually where when he found food science, and then he started, pursuing his PhD in food science. So yeah, I think for Americans, this can be very hard advice, but when you're stuck, sometimes it's better to take a break than to just keep pushing yourself in a direction that maybe isn't the right direction. And the last takeaway I want to touch on is that opportunities don't always come at the best time. And Brian talked about how this book deal, how the book he wrote, 150 Food Science Questions Answered, they actually asked him to write this book while he was doing his PhD, while he was also writing his dissertation. And I can't imagine doing both of those things. I thought just writing my dissertation was pretty miserable. So, I mean, he talks about how he made it work, but I do not know how he made it work. But I think this is a really, really good example that he could have said no. Like, he could have said, I can't do this book deal right now. But knowing that the opportunity might not come around again, he, talked to his wife and they found a way to make it work. And as he talked about, this book really spurred a lot of other things in his life and helped him get into consulting, helped him connect with companies. So even if it seems like it's not the right time, really evaluate if opportunity is worth doing or worth passing up. I hope you enjoyed my talk with food scientist Brian Lee, and if you're interested in his book, I will put a link in the description.